Right, I think if we're happy, let's get things started. Good morning, everybody. Great to see so many of you here on the call today. Very excited to have you and to be presenting this very interesting webinar today on demystifying AI risk. So thanks again for joining and for taking the time out of your Friday morning. We're very pleased to get things kicking off. I will just do a quick intro if that's all right. So today's session is all about discussing artificial intelligence, how it is shaping the present world, and the risks of building and using AI. A quick intro from me. I'm Niall Dowds. I'm the distribution consultant here at Zurich UK. And we are hosting this webinar as a Zurich Club Blue initiative in conjunction with Zurich Resilient Solutions. So super excited, as I say, to get stuck in. A bit of housekeeping, if that's all right with everyone, very briefly before we start. Please, any questions you have, ping them onto the chat, and we're going to do a Q&A at the end. It'd be great to hear your thoughts, any queries you have, and Shia will do her best to answer those. I'm sure she'll do a great job. The session will be recorded, so you can access that after the webinar. We'll send that round, so you can see that, and it will also be uploaded to YouTube if you wish to see it there. Just following the session, we will be sending around a feedback form. So again, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on how today went, what you loved, maybe what you would have liked to have seen, and going forwards, what kind of topics you would like us to cover. So I think that's everything from a housekeeping perspective. I will pass over to Shia now, our AI specialist at Zurich Resilient Solutions, and she's going to walk you through the presentation. Thank you, Shia.
Thank you very much, Niall. And thank you everyone for joining today. Great to see so many people on the call. Absolutely fantastic. We're here to talk about demystifying AI risk. I'm Shia. I'm a cyber and AI risk consultant at Zurich Resilient Solutions. And I'm going to start by just introducing myself and what I do a little bit before starting to go into AI use cases and AI risk. So I'm a cyber risk consultant and now a cyber and AI risk consultant at Zurich. When I started, the role was we wear two hats. You help the underwriter understand new cyber risks and AI risks now, and you also look at some of the large organizations they want to give cyber insurance to and have a look at their posture, have a look at their risks, maybe take some learnings from some market leading cybersecurity posture, and then bring those to clients. So Zurich Resilient Solutions are the risk advisory arm of Zurich, and we sell a lot of cyber risk management and cyber risk advisory services and AI risk services now too. So that's the role at Zurich. And we got involved in AI when we were asked to write an article about cyber risk versus AI risk. So there are a lot of similarities in how you manage the risk, and there's also a lot of differences and a lot of new things that come with AI risk. And I learned that whilst writing that article, and please follow it, that QR code is live. And whilst doing that, I guess my interest in the area just grew and grew. And since then, we developed a ZRS AI risk advisory service. We helped Zurich work on their Zuri chat, which is basically our chat GPT in our own safe environment, and create the guidelines for those. Now part of the Global Technical Centre of Excellence to focus on AI, and just like this webinar today, become a panelist, a speaker, a workshop host, a round table host on various AI topics. And I love those sessions because I get to learn so much from other people as well. And I'll probably learn from the questions that you asked today as well. So that's how we got involved in AI. So I'm going to start with a definition. And I appreciate that on this call, we're probably going to have a broad range of AI knowledge. There may be some people who, have heard of ChatGPT, and there may be some people who are experts in AI, but we do need to start with the very basics and all get on the same page about what the definition is. So artificial intelligence refers to a field of computer science where computer systems are developed to perform tasks that typically require human intelligence. So if it can do anything on the right there, it's probably counted as AI. So you're attempting to get it to think or act like a human. And there's actually a definition by the OECD, which I think is fantastic. So the OECD is the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development across 38 nations. And their definition is that AI is a machine-based system that infers from the inputs how to generate outputs such as predictions, contents, recommendations, decisions that will influence us. paraphrased a little bit, but trying to make it understandable. So for example, if you're writing a text and it's analyzing what you've already written and it's giving you predictions on what to write next, that actually counts as AI now. So this is a little bit controversial. If you were a data scientist or a software engineer years ago, you'd be very much arguing that this doesn't count as AI, probably arguing that machine learning doesn't count as AI. But unfortunately for them, the definition really has expanded, it has broadened. And part of the reason for that is to be able to regulate these things. If we're now using systems that can influence our lives, infer things, help us make decisions, we need to be able to regulate that. So the definition of AI needs to be broad enough for that. So that is what is AI. And if you have any questions on that, please do put it in the chat and I will touch on it later. So really interesting is why now? So the real answer to why now in terms of the buzz is obviously what happened with generative AI and how we got ChatGPT and Synthesia and Sora and all these amazing things that generated text, videos, images, audio. But there's also a lot of other developments out there. So the data analytics has enhanced massively, chatbots have enhanced massively, and there's quite a few reasons for this. So one of the reasons is computing power. We may have developed the algorithms before, but we definitely didn't have the power to run them. They're very power hungry, very intensive. The next is efficiency. So we now know that we want to use these algorithms. So we're creating processes which are designed specifically for these. So now that we're creating things that are more efficient and we have more power, it's more possible. The next is model architecture. So these algorithms were, I think Alan Turing, I think what he created technically counts as AI, but it was very complex. Like I said, it was very power hungry, and we're now managing to reduce these algorithms so that they're less complex. And there was actually, I'm not going to go into, this is the technical as it gets, don't worry. I'm not going to go into details of how it works, but the generative AI transformers is actually what brought Gen AI onto the team. And brought it to all of us everywhere. And that is because of the architecture being reduced and being applicable for us. Really, really, really crucially, accessibility of data. We just didn't have that before. And it is my belief, especially from a cybersecurity perspective, that we actually still are in the data dark ages. So there's so much data out there that we don't get, like how an attack happened, how it spread, when it finished, how much they paid for the ransom. We have some of those details, but not all of them. There's so much more data to share. And so the fact that we have been starting to share data across all sorts of industries has made us be able to train our models and to create these amazing AI solutions. And I believe that that's just going to grow and grow, and we're just going to get better and better as we have more data. So I actually want to hear what you guys think. I love asking this question. So what do you first think of when you hear AI? I've heard a whole spectrum of answers before. So please do join the Slido. You can either join on your phone or any device by following the QR code, or you can join on slido.com and just type in 2987822. So please do join and let us know what you think when you first hear of AI. I've had answers in the past, such as transformers or end of the human race. So any answer goes, please. Niall and Sarah, 7 participants typing, fantastic. Overrated, automation, job losses. Yep. Yep. Very interesting. So I quite like the overrated answer, because I like to think of it somewhere in the middle. It's not something that's going to solve everything immediately, especially not right now. It's growing. iRobot with Will Smith, love that. Robot, scary, automation and job losses, opportunities, interesting, future. So here is that variety that we've been talking about. So it won't solve the world, but also it's not going to take over the world either. It's not going to be Terminator or iRobot. It's not going to come for us, because we're not creating it in that way. We're not trying to create something that takes us over, or we aren't right now. We're trying to create something that is better at one task than a human. We're not trying to replicate a human. We're trying to say, okay, if I look at this data, it takes me a lot longer to analyze, but if I create a tool that's so much faster than me, then that can help your organization more. So it doesn't take over, but it also doesn't solve everything, and it also is quite hard to do. The computer says no. Easy, time saving, yes, definitely time saving. Godlike. This is exactly, I love this board. And I'm definitely going to take a snapshot of this from the recording, because this is exactly the case. This variety of opinions where it's scary versus it's going to change so much. So thank you so much for sharing. Not intelligent, just an algorithm. Yes, the definition of intelligence is definitely something to be debated. So I'm going to move on to the next question. Thank you so much for answering. Are you currently using it in a regular process? And this doesn't mean that you know someone in your organization uses ChatGPT, or you know that there's some data analytics. Is it part of an end-to-end process where you say, yes, we've got AI, fantastic. You started with a split? No, yes, not sure. We often see a variety in answers to this, and not sure is a really interesting one, because sometimes it will be happening in different business units across your organization without you knowing, or it will be happening, the people are using it regularly, but they haven't told anyone, so they haven't included it as part of their process yet. So I would be encouraging people to identify where they are using it and formalizing it, like, yes, this actually improves and speeds up our process, so let's slot it in formally and make it part of it. Starting to assess where we could. That's where a lot of organizations are as well. They're trying to, they've heard AI so much that they're like, okay, we need to strategize how to use it, where to use it, and they're trying to figure that out. Thank you so much for answering. Really good to get on to understand the mix of people we have on the call and where they're using it or where they're not using it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down into different use cases. So I've got 3 use cases, and I've broken these down to kind of make it more tangible for an organization. So AI can be split into many different ways, many different underlying models. But what I've done is I've thought about it from an operational viewpoint for an organization. So I've started with front-end interactive, and that would be your chatbots and stuff on your website that your users and customers and clients can talk to. Then we've got the back end, the analytics, and then we've got the resource generation. So this is the stuff that's been making us all talk about it so much. So that's the Synthesia, Sora, Bard, ChatGPT. So I'm just going to touch on what these are, kind of describe what I mean when I'm talking about them, because we're going to use them to talk about associated risks. So to start with, we've got the chatbots and virtual assistants. They're often less computing power hungry, unless you decide to put, and organizations do, unless you decide to put a large language model out there. Sometimes they're just like very complex decision trees, where you are just kind of comparing the phrases and sentences that someone's asked. So a client comes to your website, they say, I want to learn about X. The website's scanned for any words similar to that, and then it's brought to them so they can find the right page. And the real benefit of this is that a lot of people can't talk to organizations in their working hours, for example, and you're now providing 24/7 support. So people who maybe want to talk to someone, ask a question, input a form or data, that can all be done with front-end interactive chatbots or something on your website that collects that data or signposts them to the right place. So we've got the back end, the data analytics. If you're an organization with a lot of data, you can know that it can be very, very difficult to sort that out, to analyze it. It's very expensive to get the right skill sets in to be able to do something with all that data. And the more data you have, the more complex and far more time you need to analyze it. So if you are using an AI enhanced data analytics solution, you can really speed that up and streamline it. So I've broken it down into descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive. Descriptive is what we normally do. We normally look at data and maybe put it in some graphs and tables and try and figure out what's going on, try and find some insights. But what's really exciting, I think, is the predictive and prescriptive. So if you have the right data and the right tool, you can now say, okay, I'm going to double my investment in this area. What's that going to do? What's that going to do for the organization? What changes will we see? And it will tell you. So you can start theorizing different things that you want to do and then get outputs written for you, that the difference it will make. And then prescriptive is really where it's made the massive difference. And organizations who are already utilizing AI enhanced analytics will be able to do this. So maybe they say, I want to make a 20% increase on my revenue next year. What do I need to do? So now you've flipped it around. You're saying, I want to make this change. What do I need to do that? And it can go through these vast amounts of data and try and tell you what you need to change. There were some really interesting use cases. I worked with some charities talking about prescriptive and predictive analytics, and I found some interesting use cases. One of them was, I think it was they couldn't figure out why their campaign wasn't working somewhere, and it turned out they changed the color. And because the data analytics tool had no preconception or any ideas of what it could be, it identified that, whereas the charity workers themselves were saying, oh, it's because we changed the slogan, it's because we changed the motto. They hadn't realized actually we changed the color slightly and it wasn't associated with our charity anymore. So they saw that campaign and they didn't immediately think of our charity and their color. And another really good example is there was an AI solution that spent a lot of time working with Prostate Cancer UK on their donor data. And what they did is they analyzed, I think, 1.5 million customers, 5.5 million gift transactions, and they actually doubled their return on investment in their Christmas appeal this year, the year we just had, by putting all this data in and working hand in hand with an AI solution provider. So you can see the real benefit you can get out of this if you have the right data in place to be able to do it. And then next is the generative. So this is what we've all been talking about, and it's more than just ChatGPT. There's images, videos, audios, and there's also tools that are specific. So rather than having to go to, let's say, Bard or ChatGPT and saying, I would like it to be in the style of an article or a CV, you can actually go online and find models that are specifically created for that have the right rules and context around that so that they can do that quicker for you. So you'll find one that's already knows how to do CV writing. You don't have to explain the format you want it in, and it can generate that for you. So there's some really creative ways that we've been using these large language models right now, and you can find things for all sorts of different use cases. So those are three I've broken it down to for an organization. So you can be generating stuff, you can be analyzing stuff, and you can be putting something on the front end to interact with people. And then there's something I just wanted to touch on, which is actually we've started combining these types, which is really cool. So Microsoft Copilot is a really good example of combining the types where you ask a question or ask a query something in one of the tools, and then it will go to the large language model, try and understand what you've said, then go analyze all the data that you have across all your different Microsoft suites, and then bring that back to the large language model and then send the answer back to you. So we're now actually combining all of them, and it's also being used in cybersecurity. I've seen it on loads of big cybersecurity tools where what they're doing is, rather than you having to go in and search through all the logs and look for the vulnerabilities, they've put a large language model and a front-facing chatbot on it, and you can ask it, where are the vulnerabilities? Where are the logs? Is there an anomaly? And it's going back to it and bringing it to you. So by adding this onto tools, you're really enhancing how the user can interact with the data underneath. So those are the use cases. I'm going to move on to risk now. And please do remember to be asking any questions as I go through. So I want to talk about the EU AI Act. And the reason I do this is because I think it's a very, very, very good model. I really like the way they've defined the different risks. And it's actually what we're using at Zurich. So Zurich Insurance have decided to use this as our risk understanding, and that's across the board. That's how we're using it, and I think also how we're using it to assess risks across the insurance lines too. So there is something in the UK. There's the I think it's the AI for Innovation white paper. It's something like that, but it's focused on innovation rather than focusing on the associated risks and defining them. So the EU AI Act has very clear, definable risk categories. So we're going to start at the top. You've got unacceptable risk. So if it's an unacceptable risk, it's prohibited. It can't be used at all in the EU or on EU data. That's the idea. So there's an example there. We will be sending these slides out afterwards, and you'll be able to click on the links and look at the video if you're interested. So on the top right, the example there is actually to do with, in some places in China, they are doing social scoring. So this will be based on your job, your debt, your credit, and they'll analyze your biometrics, find your social score, and maybe say you can't go to this restaurant or use this train. And the EU have said this is unacceptable use of AI, it's strictly prohibited, and we're not allowed to be using facial recognition and social scoring in this way. The next level is really interesting because this is where I think a lot of AI usage, like a lot of very good and critical and useful AI usage falls. So we've got education, that could be marking papers. It's essentially anything that would affect a human. So on the right there, you can see AI and hiring bias. There was an example a few years ago where there was a AI hiring tool that looks at all the information and CV and anything it can find online and tries to analyze whether it's a good candidate. And there was an unfortunate bias that was revealed, and that was, I think it was if you did horse riding, you were more likely to be recommended, and that's because it was associated with certain schools, uni grades, and obviously when they found out this bias, they had to go back and have a look at everything and put some rules around it. But it's an example of why tools in the high risk category have to go through a conformity assessment. So the EU have created a conformity assessment for these tools, and if it's going to affect a human in this way, then it really should go through that assessment. The next one is limited risk. I really like this. They're just saying be transparent. If you've created something online and it was AI, if you're using a chatbot, if you have put up a funny video that's a deep fake, make sure that you say that it is AI, that it is not real, or that it's been created by something that isn't you. So that's a really, I think, really good way to look at that. It's not going to affect a human's life in any way or damage them in any way, but there could be misinformation. So let's be transparent about it. And emotion recognition system, I really like this example because this demonstrates that actually the risk is also associated to how you use something. It's not just the AI model itself. So emotion recognition systems have been used to detect or preempt the possibility of a stroke. And I think that's just a wonderful use of technology. But it's also, unfortunately, I think they tried to use it to detect whether there would be a riot in a sports crowd. And unfortunately, that's almost trying to preempt a crime. Don't know if any of you have watched Minority Report. Not really something that we should be doing. So again, it's not, what's really crucial is it's not just the model itself, it's how you're going to use it. And that's something that you do have to tell the EU when you go through your use case and you submit, I'm using this, this is what I want to use it for, and they decide what risk category it's in. The final one there, minimal risk. This is just stuff like it recognizes that you visited Boohoo for a dress so many times and now it's putting it on your social media, or you're in a video game and your boss is getting, the boss that you're fighting is getting harder because you're getting better. So this is something that they're not concerned about at all, but it does count as AI. It is self-improving or self-suggesting without you asking for it. So it's giving an input into your environment that you didn't ask for that can affect you. So it does count as AI. So those are the categories. I think they're really fantastic. I'm now going to move on to some potential risks for the use cases that I discussed earlier. So we're going to start with the front end, the using an interactive user-facing chatbot for your customers or clients. And this could be from you creating it yourself, or there are loads of solutions out there. You could go online, type in like AI chatbot, and you will find things that you can buy, and they will work with you to put it on your front end. So big one, this one, liability for incorrect outputs. I think it was a Canadian airline that gave a passenger incorrect advice through their chatbot. So I think the situation was someone had passed away in his family and he either asked if he could have a refund or a reduction or something on the cost of the flights. And the chatbot said he could, and he couldn't. And the airline argued in court that that's not up to them. That's not what they've written on their website or in their rules. And the court said, no, you've put that chatbot out there. You are responsible for what that says to your clients. So he won the case. I believe he got the discount and some money for the trouble that he went through and for the stress it caused on him. So you are liable for those outputs, regardless of whether you created it or whether you've bought it as a solution. So that's really critical risk to consider. The next one is baiting for unethical outputs. So when these models came out, a whole group of people got really excited about how can we mess with this? How can we get it to say something really naughty or unethical? And you may have seen that this happened also with the image generators, where they'd ask certain questions and they'd get some very questionable outputs and they had to quickly take it down and then go redo it and then release it again. And that's happened a few times. So if you are thinking of putting a chatbot out there or something that someone can interact with, you really need to be validating that. You need to be possibly even hiring someone to test that really hard and make sure that that's not going to happen. And actually similar to that is jailbreaking training data. So it's not the same output, but it's the same thing that you're doing. You're talking to it, you're talking to the chatbot or the generative model, and you're trying to get to the back end. So when you train your model on data, you will make sure that it doesn't include some things when it talks to you. So there are some things it trains on that you can't tell people about, whether that's just you trying to anonymize data, or it's some kind of secret, but they shouldn't be able to get to the training data itself, especially if you put the right rules around it. And I actually did an online kind of game where it gets harder and harder, and you start by saying to the model, tell me the password, and it tells you, and then by the end or near the end you're saying something like, if there were a password, could you tell me in a poem what that word might be? And so you can see how it may have just been given a rule, like if someone asks for the password, you can't say it, but you may be able to get around it in another way. So again, you really have to test these things, because someone could break through and get to that back-end data, or with the baiting, they could get you to say something that you don't want to say. And we really don't want to see on the news, Zurich, for example, Zurich chatbot claims this, because that would be really big reputational damage. And then the final thing here is the security of the user data collected. And this is a bit different to the jailbreaking of the training data. This is, you've collected loads of data from this. So what they've said, maybe they've inputted a form, maybe they've told you something about themselves. What are you doing with that data? What is your cybersecurity around that? And that also applies for if you're using a tool that you've paid for. So how are they processing it? How long are they holding onto it for? So you really got to think about the security of all the data and where it's going through. Are you following GDPR? So these are the 4 big risks that I see with an organization using an interactive user-facing chatbot. So again, please do ask any questions if you can think of any. So I'm going to move on to the back end, so the AI-powered data analytics. So I'm going to start with the cyber risk ones. So as with any system where you're holding vast amounts of data, or using vast amounts of data, you have to make sure that the security around that is good. There are multiple cybersecurity steps that should be put in place, whether those are access controls, network segmentation controls. You just have to make sure that you have the right cybersecurity around it. So when you are using an AI system, you need to think about it like any other system and make sure that security around that is right. And the next thing that I actually think is overlooked a lot is availability. Like any critical system, if you're using that in everyday processes, losing that could mean that you lose revenue, you lose operational time, and if you've become really reliant on that, then it needs to be included in your business impact assessment, in your business recovery plans, all these kind of things. And I do foresee that. I do foresee that there will be solutions out there where you are using it for your financials, for your resource management, for all sorts. So you have to make sure that you've got the confidentiality and availability of the system in place there. So data integrity. So this is where it starts to get a bit different to other typical technical systems out there. The poor training data. So there are a lot of people who are very, very excited to use these tools, and that's great. And you hear a lot of senior leaders who are like, I want to buy this solution, I want to use this tool. But if you don't have good data for it, there's almost no point. That's almost step 1. You need to make sure that your data is full, is accurate, is clean, is in place. Otherwise, you could just be getting incorrect outputs and making very poor decisions. So, for example, if you had a financial system that tells you where you should invest your money, if the data that you're giving it is poor, then that could be catastrophic. You could lose so much money. And so you've got to make sure that that's in place first. And that's actually step 1 in a AI strategy, I think. And then the next is data poisoning. So this can be done in 2 different ways. So either this is like cybersecurity wide, they've broken into the system and they're messing with the data on the back end. They deliberately got in and they're deliberately changing it around or removing it. But there's actually another way that you can change an AI solution and poison the data, which is a bit more scary, is you can do it very subtly. If it is a solution that is constantly learning of what you're saying and of what you're doing, then you can be subtly poisoning that data and changing that training. And it's something that we've seen attackers try to do with EDR, which is endpoint detection and response tool. So it looks at your network and it sees Shia tried to access this file again and again and again. And over time, if you keep feeding it inaccurate activity, then it won't be able to recognize any anomalous activity. So you can see how actually a very patient attacker could probably try and poison the data in the right way. So those are the risks that I see associated with the back end, and making sure that you secure the system, making sure that you have got good data in place, because the data also stops. If you've got the poor training data, it also not just incorrect, it's also biased, it's also unethical. It can give you all sorts of outputs that are not good for your decision making, and then the data poisoning. So any questions, please do put in the chat. So now we're on to, this is a bit more fun. We're back onto the generative AI, the creating resources. I'm going to show you some images here. And this is specifically, this applies to video and audio and all sorts too, but I'm going to show you with some images. So I asked an image creator to give me a charity conference in Scotland. So you can see here that there's nothing really wrong with this, but it has decided that it's all women working in charity, mostly redheads, got some tartan there. So if you didn't want it to be making these assumptions, you would have to change your inject. You would have to change what you're saying to it. And I've got another example. So you've got a CEO endorsing AI usage. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the CEO looking like this, but when I typed in a CEO endorsing AI usage and I got tons and tons of results, they all looked like this. So this is where you'd need to go back and say, I would like to see CEOs of different age, ethnicity, gender endorsing AI usage. So you'd have to make sure that you are validating the input and output there for generative AI. And the crucial thing here is not everyone thinks of this. You'd think that it'd be quite obvious, but sometimes when people are in a hurry or they're not really thinking it through, they just need a resource now, then they may not think of doing this. So it needs to be included in training and in guidance to make sure that people consider these risks. And then I've got another example here. So I love this because it is in essence extremely useful. If you're working for a housing association and you want to create a logo, you've got a really good base here. However, I don't know if you can, I don't know how large it is on your screen, but you can see there it says Hoisning 8 Association. So it's not got the text right. And again, if you weren't validating that, if you weren't checking it, if you were just in a rush, then you could be putting out something that looks very poor for you. But what I will say is that these things really do speed up the process. And not only do they give you something a lot quicker than if you created it yourself, you're getting something that isn't trademarked because it's created from scratch, and you're also getting ideas flowing. So especially with the logo example there, someone could be like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Now it looks like a shield with a house. And then they go start designing things of a shield and a house. So you really got to, the risk benefit here, I think, is the benefits are a lot better, in my opinion. So the risks there are bias, inaccuracy, and mistakes. Oh yeah, such as text and limbs. So you may have seen in videos and such where they can't quite get the hands or legs or eyes right sometimes. And in fact, if you can see the woman with the brown bob, I believe she has 3 hands. She's got 2 holding a phone and 1 holding a notebook. Very useful, but probably not accurate. Probably not something that you want to be putting out there, let's say on a report, a slide, a website. So something that has to be taken into consideration. So a lot of the generative AI text risks are very similar in terms of the bias and checking what's going in and what's going out. But there are some other things that need to be considered when you're using generative AI, which a lot of people do now. I know a lot of people are using ChatGPT and Bard to write things for them, whether it's an article or a report or a LinkedIn post. People are using it a lot more and need to consider these risks. So the model might hallucinate. And this is because when you ask it a question, if it's not clear on the input, it might think that you're asking for a made up example or scenario where that happens. So you have to be very clear that you want it to be factually correct. You want to know a certain thing, because it doesn't know sometimes whether you want to make up something for you, like a story, or whether you actually want factual information. The outputs might be full of repetition. This doesn't look fantastic if you are writing an article, for example, because it becomes very obvious that it was written by a generative model. So you have to be very careful about what's coming out. They use a lot of the same words. They use a lot of the same describing language. Not all of them. Some of them are fantastic, but there are a lot of tools that keep using the same things, and it just doesn't look good. Outputs might be incorrect. So I have many times gone to a model and said, please give me a list of all these controls that would be really good at protecting a database, for example. And it will give me a long list of controls. And I'm sure that, let's say 8 out of 10 will be fantastic and get me going and be like, oh yes, I knew that, that's wonderful. Can't believe I forgot that one. But there will actually be a few that are incorrect. So you have to be careful about what you're using it for. Maybe you should be using it to get those thoughts flowing, but you shouldn't be using it for true knowledge learning, or you should be validating it. So if I do ask it something that I'm not sure about and it gives me an answer, I'll then go find the matching article or something like, okay, I didn't think of that, let's go find it. But it is more useful than typing something into Google, because often if you type something into Google or Bing, you're getting a keyword search, you're getting whatever is most related to what you wrote, and then you're going to get loads of different things that are focused on one. Whereas if you ask a question to one of these models, it's going to give you a list of answers and you can choose which ones you want. Users may not know how to write injects, so I highly recommend an inject course for everyone. It just helps you give good context. It helps you know what to add if you want it to be correct. Sometimes there are some keywords or phrases that you can add that people don't know, to make sure that it's actually giving you good information. So I would recommend inject training if anyone is actually supposed to be using it as part of their job. And this is linked to context awareness. So there are a lot of tools out there that don't have fantastic context awareness. It's very difficult because sometimes a human will say, tell me about this thing, and the acronym, for example, is related to 10 different acronyms out there, and it doesn't know what you're talking about. But the human language is very funny. We have lots of different words meaning the same thing. So you have to be very, very clear in what you're writing. Clear, structured, logical, and make sure you give examples as well, because it can copy examples. And you can see on the bottom there, I've put 2 humans next to a little computer, and this is because I've been evangelizing the human sandwich. I believe that there should be very thorough validation of everything going in and coming out. And that isn't just for generative AI, that's for all the other things we've been talking about too, the back-end data analytics, the chatbot. But there really needs to be, okay, have I given it the right information? Is it giving me the right information out? Because then you can go back, you then feedback loop and go back and say, well, it didn't give it well this time, but actually I could tweak it. So that's the other thing, not to give up as well, because you can change what you've written to get a better output. So those are the risks that I see from the use cases that I gave for an organization. I've got some AI risk case studies. I'm not going to go through them in too much depth for the case because of time. I want to make sure I get onto questions, but I'm going to briefly touch on them. So these are some interesting use cases that I've included because people wouldn't think that they are using AI. So we've got a council that's got a truck, and on top of the truck, you've got a 360-degree camera, and it's looking around all the trees, and then it tells the council that tree looks unhealthy. That tree looks fantastic, and it tells you the type as well. So there's 2 things that AI is going on here. So one is enhancing and improving the imagery from the camera, and 2 is the analytics that are going on to compare to all the training data it has and then diagnose the tree. So the actual model itself doesn't sound dangerous. It's not using any human data, and it's not making any like unethical decisions based off of it. However, we are talking about human life, and that's because of the use of the model. So we are using that algorithm to decide whether a tree is healthy. If it misdiagnoses, that tree could fall, it could hurt someone, it could hurt a car, a house. So you're now actually tipping into the high risk category. I should say conformity assessment, now tipping into the high risk category from the EU AI Act. Another really interesting example is Wi-Fi signals being used to detect falls in care homes. So the radar scans the Wi-Fi and how a human body interacts with the Wi-Fi. So you're now looking at all sorts of risks. You've got the data security risk, the privacy risk, the risk of error, and now really interesting and ethical risk. There are some questions raised, which are, the more we create these AI solutions to help elderly, let's say, are we going to go see them and speak to them less? So there's now an ethical consideration as well, which might fall out of that. And again, scanning a Wi-Fi network, using radar, doesn't sound like it's a high risk thing, but if it's being used incorrectly and people are relying on that to tell you whether someone's fallen, you're now falling into the high risk assessment. So something that may not seem high risk is because of the way it's being used to affect humans. Here's a limited risk one, really nice and easy, using cameras and weight and being trained to know the signs of whether a bin is full and needs to be picked up for collection. So that's limited risk. It can't really affect anyone in any negative way. So I thought these were fun. That's why I'm going to touch on them. Going to go through them really quickly. AI trouble in the news. Some of these back up some of the things that we've been speaking about through this webinar. So number one, disinformation. Like we said earlier, the generative models could be telling you things that are incorrect and you could be spreading it, but that's not actually what this is talking about. It's not talking about the model being incorrect. It's talking about the speed at which people can spread disinformation if they want to. So it's now increasing people's ability to spread stuff that they shouldn't be spreading. The next one here is increase in malicious phishing. So again, this is a different type of risk. It's not the risk of an organization using AI, it's a risk of people attacking you. So what's happened is normally when you get a phishing email, it's like a vast spam generic email that's sent to thousands of people. Now we're talking about people being able to do business email compromise, which is where they can write a tailored email specifically for you. So we've now enhanced low-level hackers' ability to write something convincing, and they're able to do it much faster than they were able to before. Next one here, we touched on the liable for an AI chatbot's outputs. What this article actually shows, and you can follow it when we send this out, is that this has been happening across the board. It wasn't just that Canadian airline. There are a lot of companies in America that have been held liable for the information from the AI chatbot. So it's becoming a rule rather than a one-off. Deep fake. This was a really interesting story where someone in Hong Kong received an email saying, can you give me 25 million from the CFO? And I think he was like, no. And they said, okay, we'll have a Teams call to discuss it. And he was in the Teams call, and everyone on the Teams call were legit. They were all people that he thought worked in the organization. It was the actual CFO. He did not know it was a deep fake, so he did send that 25 million. And what's really interesting off the back of this is we heard it and we're like, oh, that happened in Hong Kong. What was revealed about a month later was it was actually a UK engineering company. So a lot closer to home than people originally realized. And then this final bit is who's getting sued. So Microsoft, OpenAI, GitHub, Stability AI, many more did not get permission for a lot of the data they used and they found online to train their models. So they're getting sued for that. So that is a whistle-stop tour summary of AI risk. We've covered a lot of different areas. As you can see here, the areas that I covered were more organizational. There's actually so much more we can talk about in terms of training the model or in terms of enhanced cyber attacks. But maybe that's another seminar for another time. I'm just going to briefly touch on what we think is the best way to combat this. So I mentioned that a lot of organizations are trying to use AI, and that you've got a lot of senior leaders and a lot of boards who are saying, we don't want to fall behind, we want to use AI. So we start with demystifying it, breaking it down like we have today. What are the use cases? Where can I use it in my organization? What are the risks that come with that? Kind of a cost benefit analysis of use case versus risk, and help the organization understand why they can do that. Training, we've spoken so many times today about how if they don't know what to write, if they don't know how to analyze the outputs, if they don't know the associated risks, then what can we do? How can we even stop this? How can we reduce those risks? Because people are going crazy using this wherever they can. So that training is really important. And then finally, an audit. So for organizations who are using AI, how are they mitigating those risks? Have they categorized those use cases? Have they categorized those risk categories that we went through with the EU AI Act? So this is what we think is the best approach to reducing that AI risk. So I feel like I've given a lot of information in a short amount of time. If you ever want to talk to me about it, that's the QR code to my LinkedIn and also my email. I'm very happy to chat. As you can tell, quite passionate about this, very happy to talk about it anytime. And I think Niall and Sarah will move to questions now if we can.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Shia. That was really great. We have got a couple of questions, I think. Guys, if you can think of any more, please add it to the list. But for now, let's just tick on with a few we have. we've got one from Jack here in the chat, and he's talking about when you're referring to unacceptable risk, which I think was part of your EU framework slide. And what is the difference between manipulation here and something like a deepfake?
Ooh. So was that from, hang on, should I go back to the slide? I'm going to bring up the slides so everyone can see. Oh, here we go. Manipulation and a deepfake. I think it's referring to how you use it. So before we said the deepfake, if you're posting online, it's like a funny video, it doesn't really matter. But if you're using AI to manipulate the situation deliberately and strategically and repetitively, and it's a tool that's actually designed to do that rather than a generic deepfake tool, then it would be prohibited. So it's about the use case.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We have another one in the chat here from Jack also. He's saying, why do AI image generators seem to show certain prejudices, as in some of the examples you gave?
Yep, I'm going to go back to that too so people can see those prejudices. That is because of the training data itself. So when you create an AI model, you need to go through all of these validation testings. They should have been tested for this. Or it's about the rules that you put either side. So when you first make this model, you should have someone who tries all of this and looks for what we call as like personally sensitive parts of your information. So whether that's your ethnicity or your age or your gender, it should be looking for if those can be revealed or biased. And then you can go back if that is revealed, if they do show that everyone in charity is a woman and everyone in Scotland is a redhead and every CEO looks like this, then you need to go back to that data and change the balance of the data.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm not sure if we have anything else in the chat currently. So unless anyone, oh, we've got one. Let's just come in here. Is there much legislation for AI yet, or are countries offering guidance, such as the EU, and hope that the courts start making precedent in court cases?
Yeah, so it's funny this one because, so for example, with the liability, we've seen it coming through in court, even though there's no actual legislation around it yet. I think it's coming. My understanding is they're working on it. And for example, with the EU AI Act, you have 2 years to conform, and then it will be. Then they will be acting on it.
Yeah. Any more questions to come through? No worries if not. We've covered a lot there, and I think
yeah, I was going to
agree
say there was so much there that if you end up thinking about it afterwards and want to follow up with a question, please do message or email or even just message Zurich and we can send out answers afterwards.
Absolutely. No, that would be great. Well, look, thanks again, everyone, for joining today. Hope you found that informative and useful. It's great to see so many of you on here, and I hope you, you learned a lot. And we'll send around all materials, so we'll send around the slides as well as the recording and a feedback form after this call. So, thank you once again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Fridays and your weekends.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.